Why do you send all these weapons to Ukraine? Why don't you simply pick up the phone and call Vladimir Putin? Why don't you try to negotiate and find a diplomatic solution? Now, that is something that Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, hears a lot here in Germany. So what did he do last week? He picked up the phone and called Vladimir Putin.
The feedback what we have got from this phone call is that Russia will not change.
Well, this is Hanno, the defense minister of Estonia. That's a small Baltic country very close to Russia, where the phone call from Berlin was not seen as being particularly helpful.
And Putin launched after this call immediately, and the next day, very big assault, a very big air attack on Ukraine, using the hypersonic weapons like Zircon and other ballistic missiles. So this is the answer to that call from Russia. So they systematically claimed West collectively that we are behind or we are guilty of that war. And, we clearly saw that these kind of calls does not change the course of Russian army and does not change the thinking of President Putin, because he is thinking probably at the moment that, he can outlast the West. And this is exactly why we have to increase our support to Ukraine and to show that Russia cannot outlast the West. And we can support Ukraine not only as long as it takes, but mostly as much as it takes. The only message, the only word President Putin and Kremlin understands is the word of force.
So Olaf Scholz did get a lot of criticism for this phone call with the Kremlin. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, said that Olaf Scholz had opened Pandora's box. And Donald Tusk in Poland was also not very pleased. So especially those European countries that are geographically closer to Russia criticized Olaf Scholz's attempts to enter into a dialogue again with Vladimir Putin after not having spoken to him for 2 years. But what should Europe do instead? And that's what I talked to Hanno Pevkur about, and we'll get to that in a bit. But first, Michaela, you're fresh out of the plane. You went to Rio in Brazil. You traveled with the German Chancellor on the plane and witnessed him at the G20 meeting, essentially a lame duck. Did you talk to Olaf Scholz about this phone call to Vladimir Putin at all?
Yes, absolutely. That was, of course, one of the questions we had for him. Why now? And why, after months of insisting that he would only pick up the phone to Vladimir Putin if there really was something to speak about, if there really was some headway that could be made, why did he pick this particular time?
Because he'd always said that, right? He'd always said, I'll talk to him once there are new developments. And we were all speculating, what are the new developments? I mean, the situation for Ukraine is desperate on the battlefield. Russia doesn't seem to be stopping its attacks. If anything, they're intensifying them. Maybe the North Korean soldiers were something where there was a new development. What was Olaf Scholz's justification? Why did he do that?
Well, his argument was that he wanted to demonstrate that he'd basically checked in with Vladimir Putin and that he was able to go into that meeting with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, being able to demonstrate that he had gone out of his way to check what Vladimir Putin's situation was right now, what his status quo was, and that simply has not changed. That's something he took in there, together with, of course, in the background, seeing that commitment from another lame duck president, US President Joe Biden,
who didn't even manage to be on the spot for the family photo in the end. He missed it by 30 seconds or something. Was that it?
He did. At the same time, politically, he's trying to back up Ukraine as much as he possibly can, also giving the green light for those long-range missiles. But at the G20, it became very tangible that the West, and I think here Vladimir Putin will be able to outlive the West as we know it in that sense, certainly the Biden administration. And Joe Biden didn't show up in time for the family photograph of the G20. These are the leaders who represent 4/5 of the world economy, almost 2/3 of the world population. But not waiting for the US president is something that would have been unheard of in previous times. And I think it does show how power is shifting in the world into a more multipolar system with the G20 and particularly Brazil's President Lula da Silva having turned it into something of a love fest for China. We saw more than 1,000 Chinese flag bearers in the city. These were all Chinese citizens, but we also saw at the G20 that Lula da Silva certainly is seeking an alliance with China, also economically, but also politically as a counterweight to an incoming president, Donald Trump. So that was the shift in geopolitical power structures in real time there.
How would you say, does that become tangible? I mean, how do you feel that shifting? Is it purely the agenda that is being set? Is it those symbolic moments like not waiting for the American presidents? How would you make that tangible, that those emerging powers are beginning to see that this is an era of geopolitics where dynamics are changing?
Well, let's put it this way. Neither the US nor Germany were able to get Vladimir Zelensky invited to this G20. There was a determination, and that also played out in the talks, that this conflict in Europe, the Ukraine conflict, but also the Middle East conflict, that war in Gaza was not going to be allowed to overshadow and determine the bigger issues, it was felt, by Lula da Silva, Brazil's president and the host of this 20, which he feels needed to be center stage. Instead, he made the fight against global hunger and poverty the key issue. He got countries to sign up to an agenda to tackle that particular issue. And he is treating, and the G20 are increasingly treating, Ukraine as something that is really getting in the way of making headway on these issues and formulating an implicit expectation that the West should just deal with this regionally. This led to a bit of frustration. We also saw the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz criticize that Russia wasn't really seen as the perpetrator in that statement, but how could it be? It's also sitting around the G20 table.
Although it was not Vladimir Putin, right? It was Lavrov who was
it was, I mean, Putin can't travel, but it was quite clear that the Russians are not going to sign up to anything like that anyway. So I think this was more about lodging the German position on that, but also when it comes to the Middle East conflict, there's no stressing of who is the perpetrator, that it was Hamas who attacked Israel, that Israel has this right to defend itself. That's also Germany would have liked to see, but increasingly it's quite clear, yes, fine, that's what they would like to see, but this is seen as a regional preference. It's no longer consensus in the G20, and that is something also the German Chancellor accepts the West, Europe, Germany will have to learn to live with.
And what was it like seeing the German Chancellor at what is probably going to be his last international meeting? Did you get the feeling that he is a lame duck? What kind of a feeling do you get from him? I mean, he sometimes then comes and talks to the journalists. We're not allowed to quote from those conversations, but you can always tell from his mood. Does he realize that he's somebody whose weight doesn't count as much anymore on the international stage?
Well, there's two aspects to this. He insists that he will get re-elected in February. The polling currently out there doesn't suggest that. So just leaving domestic politics of Germany aside for one moment, Olaf Scholz is someone who speaks of Germany as kind of a centrist power. He recognizes, and he's very frustrated at not being able to make headway on key issues, particularly with France, when it comes to Mercosur, the trade agreement that simply isn't getting off the ground after decades of negotiation because the French are blocking it right now.
Why are they blocking it?
Oh, because of agriculture subsidies. And that's also something that is very much blocking Europe to a certain degree. So this raises question marks of how determined and whether Europe is determined enough to get its act together before the US President Trump comes in February. The short answer is no. But Olaf Scholz is someone who has recognized that the power, the old East-West is simply not it's no longer a reality, and that having a multipolar world means having good relations with the power brokers of the future. So there clearly is that recognition there. Is he acting accordingly? Well, there you have to almost go into the small print of the politics he stands for, because what he has not been able to achieve is uniting Europe behind a common position when it comes to basic things like foreign policy, their stance on the Middle East, a conflict that is affecting Europe to a very large degree. Even on Ukraine, it remains increasingly, it becomes a struggle. So it very much highlights and shows the weaknesses of the West in a very sober, cold daylight.
But when you talk about that feeling that Europe doesn't speak with one voice, and we have Donald Trump who's going to come into the White House in January, when do you think are the Europeans going to understand what, with all the emerging powers now moving to the forefront of international discussions, that the old era is over, where everybody's interested in hearing what Germany has to say about something? Is that what's standing in that way, do you think?
Well, it's not there's a lack of recognizing the moment. I think there are countless intellectuals and politicians who recognize this. It's just a very hard sell to your electorate. And that's what we're seeing happening. You saw Emmanuel Macron weakened by snap elections that he called. You have snap elections in Germany right now. And
is that just a problem for Democrats? I mean, to be honest, at the moment, you get the feeling that somebody like Vladimir Putin, but also Xi Jinping, they don't have to make plans that they will have to justify in front of their electorates after 2 years' time, because they might then be voted out of office or something. They can make much longer plans and essentially not have to justify them at all. I mean, is that how much do you get the feeling that democracy is really being challenged at its core here?
Well, that's the Chinese pitch, saying, look, democracy isn't delivering to its people. And that is the challenge at the moment, both in the United States, where we have actually seen an overwhelming majority by some 5 million for Donald Trump, people voting into office a man who has a very questionable track record on what his commitment to democracy is, period. There is, and polling shows this throughout Europe as well, there's a growing appetite for a more authoritarian style of leadership, a strongman kind of leadership. And I deliberately say man because this seems to be a very much a gender-based issue going by what we've seen in the United States, men particularly voting for Donald Trump. And the big question is whether Europeans will be able to rally behind a common purpose here, and when this will kick in. In Germany, we're now seeing that the auto industry is no longer performing. They say that deliberately because they just don't have the sales. And in Germany, there's a saying, if the auto industry is feeling pressure, this is really bad news for the German economy.
Well, it goes to the heart and soul and core of German identity.
It does, but it also raises a question mark of whether this reliance on the auto industry is really the future. And this is something that people are grappling with. And here, particularly in Germany, there is a consensus that it's the role of the state to shield people from the influences of the outside world. And this is no longer possible, both with Ukraine, but also with the shifting of basically how the economy works and where Germany is making the revenue to fund a state that is delivering a social welfare system to its people. So there's a great expectation, and the big question is who's going to break the news that this model is now really under pressure. So it's a very tough sell. And that is something that is putting democracies on the spot, whether they really will be able to deliver. And that's where we are.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I sometimes get the feeling that it's very difficult to grasp, especially for the Germans, but also for other Europeans, that the traditional model is no longer working. We had that model that Russia delivers us cheap energy, the Chinese buy our cars, and the Americans protect us. And if all these three things are being challenged at the same time, it is very, very difficult for people to understand that things need to change, because people ultimately don't want too many changes in their lives. And that is also something, of course, where we can see that here in Germany the population is very divided when it comes to how far should we go in supporting Ukraine, because some people are saying, is that any of our business? And we see that in the comments, by the way, on YouTube. Yes, we read your comments. Lots of people there saying, why on earth is Germany doing that? Why isn't it staying out? We do understand that people in Poland or in countries that are closer to Ukraine, that they would support Ukraine, but why Germany?
But that's the job of leadership. Citizens don't have to understand like the ins and outs of an economic model. That's the job of leadership, to define the path ahead and why it's worth going through a transition process. But
do you get the feeling that the leaders are doing that?
They're very busy with themselves right now. Now it's all about those snap elections coming up. And we're seeing that in the US as well, where Donald Trump got elected with a promise of tariffs, of basically, shutting the door to the world. And there's no recognition that it is that global trade that has produced that wealth in the first place. And that is ensuring that people can go to Target and get like a cheap Chinese made product, which would cost a lot more if it was produced in the United States. So there's a kind of a rise of nationalism. And we're also seeing that in Europe as well, where right-wing politicians with the promise of basically shutting out the world are scoring in the polling in point-blank denial that it's international trade that is creating that kind of wealth and is keeping prices low for consumers here. And it would be very interesting to see how Donald Trump navigates that and what knock-on effect that will have on Europe. But for the time being, the question whether it's worth investing in Ukraine gets any traction. That is a question for leadership here. And here, Germany is the odd one out right now. We are seeing Joe Biden trying to pack up the Ukrainians as much as he can, not just with those with extra funding, but also by allowing them to use these long-range missiles. The Brits have just done exactly the same, because they are recognizing that now is the moment to push back on Russia as much as possible before Donald Trump does whatever he's planning to do on day one to stop this war. And here Olaf Scholz is scoring in the polling by promising that he will not deliver Germany's tower system. He will not go all the way. And that's the open question, how this will potentially reshape a European map, and whether there's a recognition that this cannot be in the interest of Europeans.
And that is a very good way of linking to the interview that we already saw at the beginning, or heard. Hanno, the Estonian defense minister, well, he was in Berlin this week, because in Berlin there's an annual gathering of European countries, European institutions, and NATO. It's called the Berlin Security Conference, has been going on since 2001. And Hanno Pevkur, we're seeing him there on the stage. He addressed the gathering, talked about European defense. He had to rush to the airport afterwards. But he did speak to me from there about the mood in the European defense community.
Well, I believe that the mood is very pragmatic, that we all understand that the situation on the battlefield is difficult in Ukraine, but at the same time also we are waiting for the new administration in the United States coming into the office. We see the tensions in Middle East, also in South China Sea. So the global view definitely is not easy. But we all understand that, this is exactly the time where we cannot say that we will pause our actions or we will pause our military aid to Ukraine. It's in contrary. We know that the Russian military and Russian army wants to destroy every single critical infrastructure object in Ukraine. So to leave Ukrainians without electricity, without water supply, without heating, for the winter time, and to push Ukrainians behind the negotiation table. So this is why I believe it is very, very important at this very moment to continue with our help and to send out the messages that we are doing even more as we have done so far.
You just said that we don't really have the time to hit the pause button. At the same time, here in Germany, we have a situation where we have a lame duck chancellor. Germany is going to the polls in February, and that obviously creates a political vacuum. And what does that mean for European defence, that there is this political vacuum where nobody knows just how Germany will behave, the next German government, when it comes to support for Ukraine?
That is true. That of course, we knew that the elections will come next year in Germany, but the estimation was that they will be in autumn time. Now they are brought in front. So we have these elections on 23rd of February, which means yes, that there will be some kind of vacuum or interim time for the German government to make big decisions. But nevertheless, as we see also from the United States, that during the interim period, still the president is active. And I really do hope that also in Germany, we will see that Chancellor Scholz will make big and important decisions also before the elections on 23rd of February.
But you've just criticised the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz for one of the decisions that he has made in his last weeks of being in office. On the stage at the Berlin Security Conference, I heard you say that it is not a good idea to talk to Putin on the phone. And can I ask you, shouldn't everything be tried diplomatically to end this war as well? Don't you understand this argument as well?
I understand that argument very well and perfectly, but the reality is that also, and the feedback what we have got from this phone call, is that Russia will not change. And Putin launched after this call immediately, and the next day, very big assault, a very big air attack on Ukraine, using the hypersonic weapons like Zircon and other ballistic missiles. So this is the answer to that call from Russia. So they systematically claimed West collectively that we are behind or we are guilty of that war. And, we clearly saw that these kind of calls does not change the course of Russian army and does not change the thinking of President Putin, because he is thinking probably at the moment that, he can outlast the West. And this is exactly why we have to increase our support to Ukraine and to show that Russia cannot outlast the West. And we can support Ukraine not only as long as it takes, but mostly as much as it takes.
So was Olaf Scholz's phone call to Putin not productive, or was it counterproductive?
Well, I believe that when Chancellor Scholz made a decision to call to Putin, so of course, he had all the right to do that, because it's his decision. It's not my decision or somebody else's decision. But the point is that, the outcome was large-scale air attack to Ukraine. And the outcome was that, that Putin is not changing his mind. So this shows that and then what we have said all the time, that unfortunately the only message, the only word President Putin and Kremlin understands is the word of force. And you have to put Ukrainians to the positions that even when Ukrainians decide in one moment to go to the negotiations, then they have to have the power position. They have to have the force position to go into these negotiations. Because when they are going to the negotiations at this very moment, the outcome of these elections, the outcome of these negotiations, it will not be in favor of Ukraine. So this is why, we have to help Ukrainians to be in the position where they can really negotiate about peace and the future of Ukrainian people and Ukraine as a nation.
Do you think that all Europeans have understood this message, or do you get a sense of a continent at a crossroads?
Well, when I'm sitting behind the table in NATO or in European Union, all the defense ministers, all the leaders of the country, they have the common understanding, maybe with some diversities from Hungary side or Slovakian side, but nevertheless, the common joint understanding is that we are helping Ukraine as much as it takes and as long as it takes. But of course, only words doesn't help Ukraine. The actions are the ones which are helping Ukraine, and there is definitely still urgent need for the air defense rockets and assets. There is definitely an urgent need to speed up with the training of Ukrainian forces, and of course any other equipment which will be sent to Ukraine helps Ukrainians to fight back and to push Russians out of Ukraine. But we all understand it's not easy. But strategically looking, Russia has not gained any strategic advantage or any strategic goal what they had before starting this brutal war of aggression.
Now, your country is investing quite a big share of your GDP into defence, upwards of 3.4%. You say that you're going to spend even more next year. And from the Baltic states, the message is very clear. Europe needs to do more for its own security, and that means also raising defence spending. But how do you get the other Europeans to do the same?
I believe that, it's not only about Estonians or Poles or Latvians or Lithuanians. It's about all of our security, and it's about our joint commitment, because we've decided jointly in NATO that we have new defense plans for NATO. We have new capability targets. So it's not about, only the percentage. It's also about the capabilities, because you might increase the percentage from 2% to 3%, investing that money to salaries, to pensions, and you will not get any new capabilities. So this is why we've said all the time that you need to invest into capabilities. And investing into the capabilities means that, this is the only way to meet also the capability targets, what we have decided collectively. And when we have decided something collectively, it is normal to keep this commitment also collectively.
Now, this is, of course, also a message that Europeans will have to send to the US. We have a new administration coming in January, where it's very clear that the Americans are going to expect Europe to do a lot more. And we get the feeling that outgoing US President Joe Biden is lifting some of the restrictions to sort of leave a mark before Trump takes over, lifting restrictions that have so far been in place for American weapons being used by Ukraine, such as the idea that Ukrainians are now allowed to also target military infrastructure on Russian territory, or we're now seeing reports about mines that are being that the Ukrainians will be able to use. Berlin has again said no to delivering the Taurus cruise missiles with that long range that could potentially hit Moscow. They just argue that the risk of escalation is too high. Isn't that a legitimate concern?
The only one who is escalating in this war is Russia. They started this war of aggression. They brought phosphorite bombs into the battlefield. They started using the gliding bombs. They are the ones who are using and escalating different means, all the time. So it's not about us. We are giving the opportunity for Ukrainians to fight back and to fight for their own country. So I don't see any escalation here. And then in last days, we have heard that Putin is again raising the question of the threat of the nuclear weapon. So the Europe and the West collectively is not escalating anything. The only thing we are doing is that we are trying to help Ukrainians to fight back and to fight for their country. So any discussions about escalation, in my understanding, are just senseless, because in that we heard that Russia said, when you're sending tanks, this is an escalation. When you're sending the HIMARS, this is an escalation. When you're sending the fighter jet, this is an escalation. So of course Russia is rhetorically all the time accusing the West, and now when we are starting to explain that no, this is not an escalation, I believe that this is already the false standpoint, because we have to say very clearly, the only one who is escalating all the time is Russia and Russian army.
What happens if Ukraine doesn't win?
I truly believe that they can win if we are helping them and if we are giving them enough equipment and training to do that. But of course, we all understand that the aim of Putin has not been to stopping Ukraine, because the aim of Putin has always been to show that the collective West has collapsed, that the collective West is not working. And I just remind us that he had his famous speech in Munich Security Conference in 2008 or 7, and from there you can get all the hints about his ideas to create buffer zone, to create the gray zone between the West and the Russia, to avoid any enlargement of NATO. So from my point of view, or as I see the world, nobody can say to anybody that will you join some alliance or not. It's up to the countries, it's up to these people to decide whether they want to join European Union, whether they want to join NATO. So in that sense, the consequences to give more freedom, more understanding to Putin that he achieves by military means his goal is definitely something we don't want to see in the future, and definitely this will shape a lot the future Euro-Atlantic security architecture.
Now, is that something, I wonder, that you're going to be using in your strategy when it comes to talking to the Trump administration about Europe and peace and security in Europe? Which arguments are you going to use to convince Donald Trump that the US shouldn't completely withdraw from Europe? Because of course Donald Trump will have a lot of other issues on his table. He will probably look at China a lot more. How do you keep him interested in helping Europeans support Ukraine?
Europe needs United States, and United States needs Europe, and we are the strongest allies. United States has always been the watchdog of democracy globally, and they have been standing for these values, what are important also here in Europe. So this is why I truly believe that these upper values or higher values, what we have in Europe as democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, and all these democratic countries' values are something which keep also United States here in Europe. And I truly believe that also it is very, very important for the United States to have the bases like Ramstein, like Naples in Italy, like core size military unit in Poland. So these bases, they need to have also the role in the global security architecture. So this is why I truly believe that it is a beneficial relationship for both for Europe and for the United States. And also, I believe that Donald Trump always wants to be on the winning side. And when you want to be on the winning side globally, then US needs Europe as much as Europe needs US.
So very specifically, we all know that Donald Trump is somebody who likes transactions, he likes deals. What, in your view, should be the deal that Europeans offer Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is also a golfer. And I've said that once that, when you're a member of the golf club, and when you're paying your fee, then you have the same rights. Doesn't matter, are you a billionaire or millionaire or just a normal worker. So this should be the same understanding when we think about NATO. NATO is a collective alliance defending the Euro-Atlantic security and keeping the peace. And I truly believe that it is important to show for Donald Trump's administration that we are taking our commitments seriously. And to show it in the best way is to increase defense spendings here in Europe and to show that, yes, we are doing. Estonia is contributing at the moment percentage-wise more than US is doing. So we have 3.4, they have 3.34, something like this. But the point is that when we are doing our share, US will do its share.
Now, Donald Trump, we all know, has promised to end the war within 24 hours. How optimistic are you that this can happen, that the war can end in, say, the first quarter of 2025?
One thing is political campaign. And during the political campaign, of course, big slogans like ending the war in one day are important to say. But in one moment, after 20th of January, when it will be inaugurated, everyday business starts. And that means that then diplomacy will take over political slogans. And then you need to have either Reaganism, what Putin wants to, what Trump wants to bring back. This is peace to strength. And this is where the United States can show that through showing the force, through showing the clear message, you can achieve the peace. But for that, as I said, you need to be in the position of force. You need to go into these negotiations to end this war from the force position. And of course, here, United States can help a lot.
I just get the feeling that there's not enough optimism going around these days for understandable reasons, which is why I like to ask my interviewees, what gives you hope at the moment?
I get the hope, being in Ukraine. I was there last week and met with many Ukrainians, with the industry, on the political side, with ordinary people. And this gives me hope that they are ready to fight for their own country. And if Ukrainians are ready to fight for their own country, we cannot we cannot be tired, or we cannot discuss fatigue over the war. So, when Ukrainians are ready to defend, when they are really losing their lives every day, then here in Europe, we have to support them. And this gives me hope that, as long as Ukrainians see the path to the victory, and there is a plan for the victory also from the Zelensky's office, then we need to be very optimistic. And, this gives me the hope, and sometimes also the sun, which is coming out in these foggy days.
Hanno Pevkur, Estonia's defense minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, the sun that's coming out is very important for your mood, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I can just say it also became tangible at the G20 that this is a period where facts are being created. There's attempts to create facts all around. Also a recommitment to international institutions that we saw there, a recommitment to climate change, a recognition that trillions, not billions, will have to be spent on that. Wording that pushes back on Donald Trump trying to deny that climate change is happening. We are clearly, as the minister said, in a period before Trump arrives, and it feels a bit like a political Wild West kind of scenario, and everything will then be pushed or forced into place in reaction to what the leader of what is still the most powerful nation in the world tweets, X's, and says. And I just want to tell one anecdote, which in the lead up to Donald Trump's first election, nobody believed he was going to get elected. And I went to a Republican think tank, and their assessment of his foreign policy views was, if he can make a deal with Vladimir Putin, this of course was way before anybody thought he would attack Ukraine, and he would have to hand over the Baltic states.
Crimea had already happened.
Yes, true. And if he had to hand over the Baltic states in exchange for something else, he would just do it. But of course, they said Donald Trump will not get elected. And this is what everybody is very concerned about. If he finds himself, if he leans over the European map and feels like he wants to change something, or he does not care about defending parts of it, that is going to create a problem that nobody in Europe is really prepared for. On the other hand, his erratic, disruptive politics could rein in Vladimir Putin. And that is clearly something that Volodymyr Zelensky is also hoping for Ukraine's president.
Absolutely. And Hanno Pevkur also said that in the interview, that Donald Trump is not somebody who wants to lose. So he also is aware that if he completely pulls out of Europe, then he hands Europe to Vladimir Putin, and that cannot be in his interest. At least that is what the Baltic states are hoping. We would like to hear your thoughts on that. So do send us comments, send us an email. You can do that to newsletter@dw.com. I have to say again, we're recording here on Thursday morning in Berlin. I recorded the interview with Hanno Pevkur on Wednesday evening. So, if news happens out there while we're talking, then do cut us some slack. Do join us again next week. And of course, also, if you want to stay up to date with all the things that are being discussed in Germany, how DW are reporting on this, our fellow colleagues, then do subscribe to the newsletter, DW Berlin Briefing, and you'll find all the info on our website, dw.com/Berlin Briefing. So until next time, we'll be back next week. Thanks very much, Michaela.
Pleasure.
Always. Bye-bye. Till next time.